Welcome to IMPACTX 2050. Our community curates impact investment and innovation trends globally in edtech, health tech, and food tech. Every week, we put the spotlight on innovators and investors to listen to their impact stories. Profitable, sustainable, inclusive, and innovative is how we define impact. So what's your definition? Coming up now is our next guest. Enjoy.
Hi, my name is Hichem Omezzine. I am born in 1980 in Tunis, Tunisia. I currently live in London, and I'm a partner at TPG Rise, based in London and covering Europe, Middle East, and Africa, healthcare and education.
Hichem, welcome. Welcome to IMPACTX 2050. You're a partner at TPG Rise, a fund with an impact mandate and focus covering EMEA. Before we talk about your business, let me start with a personal question. How did you end up in that position? Is there a defining moment in your life, education, career that led you to become a fund manager focused on, I guess, impact and EMEA and also Africa, where you do a lot of work?
I was from the beginning hugely passionate about kind of making an impact. I was born in Africa, and that kind of is a huge inspiration for what I do. I remember I was an engineer by background. I always wanted to make things. And I remember at some point of time, I wanted to make something, because I was doing some business and struggled to kind of raise funds from my dad for it, despite being, my dad is a scientist, and there was a lot of science of what I wanted to do. So that moment was actually defining for me of what I wanted to do later. And kind of stayed with me because I ended up being an engineer, but decided to kind of go in finance instead. So that goes quite a long time ago. And then I went to do an internship at the United Nations Development Program just after my study. And then again, I realized, the role that the kind of private sector could play in conjunction with development organization. And that kind of led me to my career in M&A and then private equity, and then kind of back really to kind of combining both private investing and impact with the impact investing.
So tell us a little bit about TPG Rise and what makes it different, and also how do you define impact as an investor?
So TPG Rise is really the fund that is the first global alternative asset manager to develop an impact investing with more than $1 billion under management, with a really strong belief that private enterprise has a critical role to play in addressing global societal challenge, and that we can actually create competitive financial return and measurable societal benefit at scale. And it started with the first fund raised in 2016. And from there, we grew to what we believe is the largest private equity investing platform today, focused on the social impact, but as well as the climate impact with the latest fund we raised, which is around $7 billion. I think what makes it unique, besides the scale, which I think is really important to drive private capital at scale, is the reach, because we operate in many regions across the globe, the States, Europe, Africa, Middle East, and Asia, which is, in my view, an amazing platform because it enables you to compare and contrast different business models, but also take great things from one country to the other, and being really a great engine to develop global businesses and global solutions to what we think is a global problem.
Mm-hmm. And if you have to explain to a 5-year-old, the definition of impact, what would you say?
Well, the definition of impact is, making something good to society, either educating people, helping them get a better income, or helping them to get better treatment if they get sick, or help the environment by reducing the carbon emissions in the world, or helping people get financially included and therefore suffer less financial problems.
And do you use the same definition for LPs, your investors?
I think it's the same. Then math, it gets more complicated in terms of how calculated, but I think the definition is the same.
Okay. I read somewhere that impact asset under management were already 10% of private equity asset under management, which shocked me because it's still a big number and it's also growing at 30% per annum, especially in Europe. Where do you see the impact investment trends going, and why do you think it's growing so fast?
Well, I think it's growing so fast because, first of all, there is a much higher awareness of the societal challenges that we live today. So that's the first. And second, some of these societal challenges got to a tipping point. If you take climate, for instance, we got to a point where, we can no longer wait. And we can no longer wait, and there is much higher awareness about that, and there is much higher awareness that private capital needs to play a leading role in helping, for instance, abating carbon emissions. And that drove the private capital to create solutions alongside government, for instance, on the climate side. And you can apply the same story in skilling and education, and kind of finding, treatments for rare diseases and so on and so forth, but also creating more efficient healthcare.
Mm-hmm. And so, speaking about sectors, most people think of impact equals environment or climate. You also mentioned education. You mentioned health. What are the other sectors that are qualified as an impact investment, or can they all be qualified? I mean, how do you look at this from an investor standpoint?
Well, we have a framework through which we look at the impact that a business makes in society. Most of the business we invest in tend to fit in within these sectors, which is education, healthcare, financial inclusion, and climate. But from time to time, there are other sectors that emerge. For instance, impact as a service, where you have a company that is creating impact. For instance, one of our investee companies called Benevity. It enables donations, and that's a company that is clearly making an impact in society. Another one is a company that makes carbon accounting and enables company to comply with KPIs, either regulatory or ones that impose upon themselves. So I think the definition is not sectoral, but really looking at what the business does and what impacts it's make, and backed by robust research through our Y Analytics team.
Yeah, and you mentioned assessment framework methodology. Is it your own? Is it something that you've developed that is proprietary? Is it something that you copy with pride or borrow from other organizations? Just to understand how you look at this.
Yeah, we have a proprietary framework developed through Y Analytics team, which I believe is a full part of TPG. And the team looks at third-party research into specific impact of either be it educational, healthcare, and they assess the impact through the equivalent of the dollar we invest and how much we are creating as a social good, and we try to make this quantification, and that kind of leads to the same rigor that we apply on the financial return to the measurement of the societal benefit when we make an underwriting of an investment.
Mm-hmm. Hichem, you're born in Africa, you invest in Africa. Tell us about the opportunity you see in Africa in terms of macro trends and maybe impact investment opportunities. Why is it exciting?
Well, it is very exciting because it's part of the world where, it has kind of been challenging for investors. But it's interesting that the best investments are the investment where you're making the biggest impact on society. And that kind of creates a really interesting opportunity for an impact fund like ours. And we've been an investor in Africa for a good part of the last 5 years, and we've made investments in fintech, education, and also agri. And it's been interesting watching the impact either on the students or on the people who are not financially included, or on the farmers, and so on and so forth. So it is fascinating because it's a continent where it doesn't have the same level of sophistication of infrastructure, so it enables it to leapfrog in some instances. For instance, one of our investment is Airtel mobile money, where we're giving the opportunity to people to transact through mobile in a seamless way, in a way that you don't find in the West, because there's banking infrastructure and so on and so forth. So there is a real excitement at backing these kind of unique business models in countries where infrastructure is probably less advanced.
Hichem, we care a lot about education. I know you care a lot. You invest in education now and previously. I'm suspecting you're a lifelong learner.
Absolutely.
So what are you learning right now? What is the last thing you learn, or you're trying to learn?
How do rockets work?
Okay, very good. So can you tell me then?
I did not understand, to be very honest. I ended up dropping and moving to something else.
Okay, very good, very good. Well, we get now to the next section of the interview, which is the rapid fire questions. And that's going to be linked to education. So I'm just going to ask you a question, A or B. You have to answer, right? Degree or skills?
Skills.
State school or private schools?
Both.
You can't say both. Or you can say only once. Okay, that's your only joker. Okay.
Okay. That's
but wait.
Oh, but I might take it back.
Teacher or technology?
Teacher.
Okay. And this one is going to be hard now that you don't have joker anymore. Profit or impact?
Both. I take back a joker in state and private.
Very good. If you had one prediction for the future of impact investing, what would you say it is? 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? You set the timeline.
If I have one prediction, it's that governments will try to find a way for this to become bigger, to solve their problems. And we kind of see it in different ways. We see it through, the incentives given, for instance, to renewable energy to crowd out private capital. We're seeing it in education to encourage kind of people to go to private to get skilled. I think that system is gonna be much more oiled, and it's gonna be prevalent across many industry in a way that today is not standardized. We know the specific sectors, and we know how much the government is doing, but it's not standardized. And my guess, it's gonna be much more. So I would say it's gonna be it's like a PPP 3.0, but done differently.
That's very interesting as a perspective. So you're saying, it's almost going to become a substitution of public spend, but it probably with a private investment length. That's basically what you're saying, or?
Yeah, I think what we had, in my view, we had the private sector operating, and then we had the public sector operating, and we had the PPP. And I think what we've seen recently, the emergence of kind of the state being bold when they had a pressing objective to do something, either through the IRA, for instance, in the United States, or through the different kind of budgets allocated in places like France, like Spain, like Germany, when they wanted a really pressing goal in education. And what I'm saying is, I think that will become much more democratized in the way government using the private sector through either an incentive scheme or specific regulatory framework. When they have an objective, they will try to bring the private sector into it, but not through a PPP, but through kind of a certain type of either, specific regulatory framework or incentive scheme that enables the private sector to come in and fund it. But the private sector often would need funds to be able to achieve these objectives, and that will create a wave of impact investing to back this sector to, you know, solve what are effectively societal challenges which the government and the private sector should work hand to hand to solve.
Very interesting, Hichem. You know, final question. Now, who would you like to nominate to be part of our next IMPACTX 2050 story, and why? An entrepreneur, an investor that you think represents well the world of impact investment?
Yeah, I'd like to invite my good friend Luis Lopez. Has been a great partner of one of my investment, but I think.
What does he do? What does he do?
Luis is currently CEO of an education company, but Luis is really an accomplished CEO, education CEO, entrepreneur, manager, who has operated in many continents, and, you know, for best part of the last 20 plus years, LATAM, Africa, Europe, Asia. And I think I got to really feel the real impact conviction from Luis, and the fact that actually creating great student experience, great student outcome is what gets you the great financial performance. And, you know, whether you do it in Brazil, Mexico, South Africa, you know, France, UK, it's the same thing. And I think he applied this mantra across whatever he did, and he's been very successful.
Very good. We'll make sure we invite him. Hichem, it was a pleasure. Thank you very much. This was Hichem Omezzine, partner at TPG Rise for IMPACTX 2050. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Benjamin.